In the dusty streets of Jerusalem, where the air hung heavy with prophecy and promise, 13 men walked in the shadow of destiny. They were unremarkable in appearance, weathered hands from years of labor, simple garments that spoke of humble origins. Among them were fishermen who had cast their nets into the Sea of Galilee countless times, a tax collector whose ledgers once filled with the coins of Rome, and a zealot whose heart once burned for political revolution. Yet now they walked with a purpose that transcended their former lives, following the footsteps of the one who had called them from their ordinary existence into an extraordinary journey. John, the youngest among them, often found himself lost in thought as he walked beside his master. His eyes, keen and observant, missed nothing. The way Jesus' hands moved when he spoke, the timbre of his voice as he taught the crowds, the gentle touch that brought healing to the sick and hope to the desperate. As the son of Zebedee, John had grown up with the smell of fish scales and the rhythm of waves, but now he was learning a different kind of fishing, one that sought to catch men with the net of divine love. Beside him walked his brother James, their shared blood now bound by a deeper covenant. James, whose fiery temperament had earned the brothers the nickname Sons of Thunder, found his passion being refined day by day in the presence of Jesus. He watched as their master turned water into wine at Cana, as he multiplied loaves and fishes to feed thousands, as he walked on stormy waters with the authority of one who commanded the elements themselves. With each miracle, each teaching, James felt the foundations of his world shift, realigning around a new axis of understanding. Peter, never far from Jesus' side, carried with him the weight of his new name, the Rock. Once Simon, a simple fisherman known for his impulsiveness and bravado, he now grappled with the mantle of leadership that Jesus had placed upon his shoulders. His denials and doubts warred with moments of profound insight, like the day he declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In those moments, Peter caught glimpses of the man Jesus saw in him, the pillar upon which a movement would be built. As they travelled from town to town, Andrew, Peter's brother, often found himself drawn to the fringes of the crowds that gathered around Jesus. There he would spot the outsiders, the hesitant ones, and with gentle encouragement he would bring them closer to hear the Master's words. It was Andrew who had first followed Jesus, who had run to tell his brother, "We have found the Messiah." Now he watched as that simple act of bringing others to Jesus rippled outward, changing lives one encounter at a time. Philip, analytical and practical, kept count of their supplies and often worried about logistics. Yet he had seen Jesus feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and slowly his mind was learning to embrace mysteries that defied calculation. Beside him walked his friend Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael, the one whom Jesus had seen under the fig tree. Bartholomew's initial skepticism, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" had given way to one of the most profound confessions of faith. "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel." James, son of Alphaeus, moved quietly among them, observing and absorbing. Though less prominent than his namesake, his dedication was no less profound. He listened intently as Jesus spoke of a kingdom that defied earthly understanding, where the last would be first and the humble would be exalted. Nearby, Thomas wrestled with questions that others dared not voice, his skepticism a counterpoint to the group's growing faith. Yet even in his doubts, Thomas remained, drawn by something he couldn't fully explain but couldn't bear to walk away from. Matthew, once a tax collector, now collected different treasures, the words and deeds of Jesus, which he carefully committed to memory. His trained eye for detail, once used to spot counterfeit coins, now discerned the threads of ancient prophecy being fulfilled before him. He watched as Jesus touched lepers, dined with sinners, and spoke with an authority that made the religious leaders tremble. Simon the Zealot, whose hands had once gripped weapons in dreams of liberating Israel, now found himself following a different kind of revolutionary. Jesus spoke of turning the other cheek, of loving enemies, of a kingdom not won by sword but by sacrificial love. It challenged everything Simon had once believed, yet he couldn't deny the power he witnessed in Jesus' way. Judas Thaddeus, often overlooked, carried within him a quiet strength. He observed how Jesus treated the forgotten ones, the outcasts, and in this he found his own calling. While others might seek the spotlight, Thaddeus was content to serve in the shadows, knowing that in Jesus' kingdom no act of love went unnoticed. And then there was Judas Iscariot, the keeper of the money bag, whose path would lead to history's most infamous betrayal. Yet in these early days he walked among them as a brother, sharing in their adventures and uncertainties. Perhaps only Jesus saw the shadows that flickered behind his eyes, the war between light and darkness that would ultimately consume him. As the sun set over Jerusalem, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, these 13 men, 12 disciples and their master, continued their journey. They did not know the trials that awaited them, the martyrdoms that would seal their testimonies in blood, or the way their simple act of following would change the course of history. They only knew that they had been called, and they had answered. In the gathering dusk, Jesus turned to them, his eyes holding a depth of love that still took their breath away. "You did not choose me," he reminded them, "but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit." As they settled around the evening fire, each man pondered these words, unknowingly standing on the threshold of a story that would echo through eternity. The dawn broke over Golgotha, staining the sky crimson. The apostles, scattered like sheep without a shepherd, found themselves grappling with a reality they could never have imagined. Their master, the one who had walked on water and raised the dead, hung lifeless on a Roman cross. In the aftermath of that dark day, each of them faced the crucible of their faith in different ways. John, the beloved disciple, stood vigil at the foot of the cross, supporting Mary, the mother of Jesus, as she watched her son die. The weight of Jesus' final earthly command to care for his mother rested on John's young shoulders, a sacred trust that would shape the rest of his life. In the days that followed, as he sheltered Mary in his home, John's grief transformed into a deeper understanding of love, one that would later flow through his pen as he wrote, "God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God." Peter, haunted by the echo of a rooster's crow and the memory of his threefold denial, wandered the streets of Jerusalem in agony. The rock upon which the church would be built had crumbled in the face of a servant girl's questioning. Yet even in his darkest hour, Peter clung to the memory of Jesus' words, "I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." He did not know it yet, but his failure would become the fertile soil from which a deeper, more resilient faith would grow. The other disciples wrestled with their own demons of doubt and despair. Thomas, ever the skeptic, retreated into a shell of cynicism, declaring he would not believe unless he could touch the wounds himself. James and John, the sons of thunder, found their ambitions for greatness in the kingdom lying in ashes at their feet. Matthew, the former tax collector, pored over the scriptures, seeking to understand how their hopes could have ended in such tragedy. But then came the third day, and with it an empty tomb and reports that defied comprehension. Mary Magdalene burst into their hiding place, her words tumbling out in an excited rush, "I have seen the Lord." Soon others brought similar accounts. The tomb was empty, angels had appeared, and most incredibly, Jesus himself had been seen, alive and transformed. In the days that followed, the risen Christ appeared to them, transforming their fear into courage, their doubt into faith. Thomas, face to face with his resurrected Lord, fell to his knees with the confession, "My Lord and my God." Peter, restored by a breakfast on the beach and a threefold affirmation of love, found his voice and his calling renewed. The apostles who had fled in fear now stood boldly in the temple courts, proclaiming the resurrection despite threats and beatings. As Pentecost approached, they gathered in the upper room, united in prayer and expectation. When the Holy Spirit descended in tongues of fire, their transformation was complete. Peter, once paralyzed by fear, now stood before thousands, his voice ringing out with the message of salvation. 3,000 were baptized that day, the first fruits of a harvest that would spread across the known world. James, son of Zebedee, became a pillar of the Jerusalem church, his thunder now channeled into passionate preaching that drew both followers and enemies. He would be the first of the apostles to drink the cup of martyrdom, his death by Herod's sword a testament to the cost of discipleship. Yet even as his blood stained the executioner's blade, James died as he had lived, faithful to the one who had called him from his fishing nets to become a fisher of men. Andrew travelled north and east, his gift for bringing others to Jesus now employed in distant lands. Ancient traditions speak of his journeys through what is now Turkey, Greece, and possibly as far as Kiev. In Patras he faced his own cross, X-shaped, which would become known as St. Andrew's Cross, and like his brother Peter, he deemed himself unworthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. Philip, whose practical mind had once wondered how to feed 5,000, now saw the miracle of spiritual multiplication as his preaching brought countless souls to faith. In Hierapolis he faced death with the same quiet certainty with which he had once brought Greeks to see Jesus, his martyrdom a witness to the transformation from follower to leader. Bartholomew carried the gospel to Armenia, where his preaching angered the local rulers. When faced with the choice to renounce his faith or face a gruesome death, he remained steadfast. As they flayed him alive, he continued to preach, his stripped skin a graphic testament to the cost of discipleship. Through it all, John remained in Jerusalem, caring for Mary and shepherding the growing church. When persecution scattered the believers, he eventually made his way to Ephesus, where his teachings on love and light shaped a new generation of disciples. Even when faced with persecution under Domitian, including an attempt to boil him in oil, John's faith remained unshaken. Exiled to Patmos, he received the visions that would become the Book of Revelation, a triumphant declaration that despite all appearances, Christ remained Lord of history. As the years passed, the apostles found themselves scattered across the known world, each following the path that had been laid out for them. They faced beatings, imprisonment, and eventual martyrdom, yet they counted it all joy to suffer for the name of Jesus. The timid fishermen had become fishers of men, their nets now cast wide across the Roman Empire and beyond. In Rome, Peter faced his final test. As Nero's persecution raged, he was given one last chance to deny his Lord and live. Instead, he asked to be crucified upside down, considering himself unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus. As the cross was raised, Peter's eyes looked heavenward, seeing not the gathering storm clouds over Rome, but the glorious face of the one who had called him from his boats so long ago. As the first generation of apostles faced their martyrdoms, the seeds they had planted began to bear fruit across the known world. Matthew, who had once recorded transactions for Rome, now found himself recording a different kind of account, the story of Jesus for future generations. His gospel, penned with the precision of a scribe, provided a bridge between the Old Covenant and the New, carefully showing how Jesus fulfilled the ancient prophecies. In Ethiopia, where tradition says Matthew met his end by the sword, his written testimony outlived him, continuing to make disciples long after his voice was silenced. Simon the Zealot, whose heart had once burned for political revolution, now carried the flame of a different liberation, freedom from sin and death through Christ. His journeys took him through Egypt, Africa, and possibly as far as Britain. The man who had once dreamed of overthrowing Rome now worked to establish a kingdom not of this world. When his end came, reportedly by being sawn in half, his zeal for Christ remained undiminished to his last breath. Judas Thaddeus, often overshadowed by his more prominent brothers in Christ, found his calling in the regions of Mesopotamia and Persia. In the lands where civilization had first flourished, he planted the seeds of the gospel, nurturing communities of believers who would face the dual challenges of political persecution and theological controversy. His martyrdom, according to tradition, came at the hands of pagan priests threatened by his message of the one true God. The shadow of Judas Iscariot's betrayal and tragic end hung over the early church, a sobering reminder of the possibility of falling away. Yet even this, the apostles came to understand, had been woven into the tapestry of God's redemptive plan. The 30 pieces of silver, the kiss in Gethsemane, the field of blood, all became part of the story, not as a triumph of darkness, but as a testament to the light that shines in the darkness, which the darkness has not overcome. As the years turned to decades, the impact of the apostles' ministry became increasingly evident. The gospel they preached spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire and beyond, crossing geographical, cultural, and social boundaries. In cities and villages, among slaves and free, the message of Christ crucified and risen took root and flourished. The very persecution meant to stamp out the faith instead scattered the seeds wider, as believers fled to new regions, carrying their testimony with them. John, the last surviving member of the original 12, watched as a new generation of leaders emerged. From his base in Ephesus, he guided the church through turbulent times, his apostolic authority a bulwark against the rising tides of false teaching. His emphasis on love, not as mere sentiment, but as the very essence of God's nature and the defining mark of his children, provided a crucial counterbalance to the legalisms and heresies that threatened to distort the gospel. As an old man, John would often gather the believers around him and repeat the simple command, "Little children, love one another." When asked why he said this so often, he replied, "Because it is the Lord's command, and if this alone is done, it is enough." His gospel and epistles, written in his twilight years, distilled the essence of what he had witnessed and learned at the Master's feet. The Word had become flesh, and John had beheld his glory. One by one, the apostles faced their appointed ends. Thomas, carried by his missionary zeal to India, died pierced by spears, his doubts long since transformed into unshakable faith. James the Less, son of Alphaeus, met his death in Jerusalem, thrown from the temple pinnacle and then beaten to death, his quiet faithfulness speaking volumes in his final moments. Yet even as the first apostles fell, new ones rose to carry the torch. Paul, the former persecutor turned apostle to the Gentiles, blazed trails across Asia Minor and Europe. Barnabas, Mark, Timothy, Titus, and countless others whose names are known only to God took up the mantle, ensuring that the testimony of Christ would continue to spread. The apostles' deaths, far from extinguishing the flame they carried, only served to fan it brighter. As Tertullian would later write, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." Their faithfulness unto death inspired generations of believers to live and die for Christ, creating a legacy that would endure through the centuries. In the catacombs beneath Rome, in the desert monasteries of Egypt, in the bustling markets of Antioch and the remote villages of Britain, the story was told and retold. How Jesus had called 12 ordinary men, how he had transformed them through his life, death, and resurrection, and how they had carried his message to the ends of the earth at the cost of their lives. As John, the last eyewitness, prepared to depart this life, he left a final vision, not of defeat, but of ultimate victory. In the revelation given to him on Patmos, he saw the culmination of all that he and his fellow apostles had lived and died for. The Lamb upon the throne, surrounded by a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Among them stood the apostles, their tears wiped away, their sacrifices vindicated, their joy complete. And so, as the first century drew to a close, the era of the original apostles ended, but their legacy was just beginning. The foundation they laid, purchased with their blood and sealed with their testimony, would support a church that would withstand the gates of hell itself. Their story, a testament to the transforming power of Christ, continues to inspire and challenge believers to this day, reminding us that ordinary people, touched by an extraordinary God, can change the world. In cities and towns across the globe, churches still bear their names, their feast days are still celebrated, and most importantly, the gospel they preached is still proclaimed. The message remains the same: Jesus Christ crucified and risen, the hope of the world. And in this the apostles still speak, their voices echoing through time. We cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard.